So Ant-Man 3 Quantum Drift has finally dropped in theaters, and initial reception has been mixed at best, so I thought I'd give my quick thoughts on it, because if you don't know me, I'm actually a pretty big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, little known indie series, you may have heard of it, and this is actually the first film of Phase 5, so did it deliver on finally giving us some semblance of a plan for this series moving forward? Is it a good conclusion to the Ant-Man trilogy that started 8 years ago? Sort of. Ant-Man and the Wasp 2 Kang Strikes Back was a pretty mixed bag for me. There were things I enjoyed about it, and there were a lot of aspects that didn't work. Oh, and by the way, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so don't even worry about any of that. On the positive side, this movie did sell me on Kang being the next big bad of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His motivations might not be the most complex, but I love how sincere he is about his goals of conquering as many worlds as possible. There's a lot of intrigue with him in his backstory and in what could be coming in the future, especially involving all the other Kangs. Jonathan Majors is fantastic in the role, playing him incredibly straight, serious, and even scary at times, and I appreciate that for once we don't have any sympathy or funny scenes with the villain in one of these movies. He's just allowed to be a force for destruction. I can't wait to see more of Kang in the MCU, and it seems like the series can't wait to give us more of him. I'm also glad that right off the bat with Phase 5, we already have more of an objective, a plan, or at least an idea of where things could be going next, mostly revolving around Kang himself. The biggest criticism towards Phase 4 was that it felt like despite a record amount of new MCU projects, the phase never really built towards anything. There weren't any team-up stories, and none of the individual plot threads about the multiverse really came together. However, it's clear that there are things in this movie that are going to be important to a number of upcoming projects leading up to the next Avengers films, which is more akin to the build-up in the first 3 phases. As a piece of the MCU, it's worth watching just for that reason. I also still do love watching Paul Rudd in this role. He's funny and charming, just like in the other Ant-Man movies, while also being able to pull off this film's more dramatic moments. His caring for those closest to him is still apparent, and overall, Scott does do his best to keep this mess of a movie together. I appreciate the fact that Quantumania at least tries to keep some of the themes about family in this film, although I don't think it does a great job of them. It also feels like there were a number of interesting ideas that this film brings up that are largely unexplored. It would have been cool to continue the theme of lost time in a meaningful way and explore more of Scott's relationship with the grown-up Cassie. The film also tries to bring up ideas like, what should Scott's role be in a post-Endgame world after he saves the entire universe? But between how the characters talk to Scott and treat his actions in that film, it feels like this idea was really mishandled. As an Ant-Man movie, it plays super weird, especially considering it's supposed to be the finale of this trilogy. The small-scale heist stories and the breezy tone that made the first 2 films fun and accessible is replaced with world-ending stakes and generic MCU sci-fi. This movie really does feel like AI-generated Marvel, and other than introducing Kang, I don't feel like it brought anything interesting to the table stylistically. I don't think the world building was very captivating, and I've already forgotten most of the side characters introduced. Along the same lines, I didn't think the story was very compelling. There's some fun to be had with Star Wars in the MCU, as people are calling it, but I was never invested in what was actually going on with this plotline. Also, what the movie does with the characters we already have a connection to isn't that interesting either. There are plenty of good moments though, like the Bill Murray cameo. I really like that. Also, that trippy scene from the trailer with all the Ant-Men, and some of the moments from the final battle were cool, but overall the story and plot didn't really come together for me. The inciting incident of the entire plot is also incredibly stupid. It's based on such simple miscommunication from certain characters, and it's honestly laughable how bad it is. There's also just so much inconsistency with the rules of the quantum realm, and if you stop and think about anything for too long, it's gonna fall apart. The humor was just not there with this one. It wasn't as funny or cute as the first 2, and the writing overall was pretty bad. The real issue though is the tone. The whiplash between goofy, cartoonish sci-fi antics, the snappy MCU dialogue, and Kang's entire demeanor and brutal actions is absolutely insane, and the movie kind of falls apart because of it. You've got animated characters screaming about holes 1 minute, Kang murdering people the next. The biggest example though has to be MODOK. There's a twist with him that I don't really mind, and while MODOK does have the honor of delivering the one and only line that made me audibly laugh during the movie, most of the humor with him didn't really play right. It felt like the movie couldn't decide if they wanted to pretend like they were playing it seriously with him or not, and the design is... Also, outside of Kang and Ant-Man, I don't really care all that much for this set of characters. Hope gets absolutely nothing to do in this movie. Hank has some funny moments, but Michael Douglas seems done with this franchise, and I didn't really care about any of the intrigue with Janet, as the whole plot just depends on her not telling people things so the movie can happen. Recast teenage Cassie is also completely unlikable. She was able to create the most advanced technology in the series out of thin air because she read Hank's journal. She's belittling her own dad who saved the universe, and the performance isn't great. And finally, the plucky side characters that made these movies funny and down to earth are nowhere to be found. The action isn't very good, most likely because the power set of these characters is only visually interesting in a real world setting with everyday objects. Shrinking and punching in a CGI battle world just isn't very fun to watch. Speaking of, the effects are bad. There's nothing appealing about the designs of the quantum realm in this film, and so much of the green screen and CGI is just so unconvincing and bad looking. There are things that this movie brings to the table that have me excited about future MCU entries, but overall, this is not a strong start to Phase 5. It's just such a plain Marvel movie, lacking the charm of the first two Ant-Man movies and not replacing it with anything unique or enticing. The hype that defined the first saga of the Marvel Cinematic Universe feels largely gone at this point, and I think this movie sort of exemplifies why. There's notable stuff here that affects future movies, but the movie itself is full of tonal issues and a mediocre story and other issues that people are sick of seeing in this series, which is why the reception has been so lackluster. But yeah, that's gonna just about do it for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Personally, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. It's not horrible, but it's not very good.